Hello, beautiful people. Welcome to this week's episode of the Montpelier Happy Hour here on WVEW 107.7 LP Brattleboro, your community radio station. I'm the host and producer of the Happy Hour, Olga Peters, and I am so excited. We have a full set today. Regular contributor Emily Kornheiser is here. She is one of three reps from Brattleboro. So glad you're here, Emily.
I'm so glad to be here, Olga, and I was so sorry to miss last week because of my appointment with the wood delivery guy. So really glad to be back. Classic Vermont moment. Just really hoping he'd be able to drive around to the back of the house so there would be less hauling of the wood. So I had to be there to negotiate that. But alas, he did just jump in the driveway. So
Ugh.
glad to be here and really excited about our guest.
Yes, and our guest, Kevin Ellis. So glad you can be here today. For folks who may not know Kevin, he is a communications consultant and writer working at the nexus of political and cultural change. Held many senior positions at two political consulting firms, worked with clients across the country, spent 10 years as a journalist in Nashville, Washington, D.C., and Burlington. For those who may be familiar with Central Vermont, Kevin is president of the board of directors of Downstreet Housing and Community Development, which is an affordable housing nonprofit similar to folks in our neck of the woods would be familiar with Wyndham and Windsor Housing Trust. He also sits on the boards of the Vermont Journalism Trust and Chelsea Green Publishing. But even more exciting, because we so rarely get to have a fellow podcaster on, he is behind two podcasts, Conflict of Interest, which I highly recommend people check out, and Vermont Viewpoint, which, if I remember correctly, Kevin, you're one of many people who contribute to Vermont Viewpoint. Is that correct?
That's right. I host on Thursdays and Fridays.
That's right. And that comes out of Central Vermont, does it not?
Historic Waterbury Center from WDEV, the friendly pioneer.
Wow. Nice
See,
branding.
we've got him down. Well, I'm excited you're here today, Kevin, and I'll give a little intro, and then I want Emily to kind of expand on her thoughts. But when Emily and I were talking about this, what to talk about this week, she had said, well, what about the Democratic National Convention and how Vermont fits into this wider politics and the general election coming up? And it intrigued me because I was thinking, yeah, so often in Vermont, we think of ourselves as an island, and we can sometimes forget the rest of the big world. But also, I was thinking about, what does the rest of the country think Vermont contributes? And we're known for our skiing. We're known for a lot of, Ben and Jerry's and food and things like that, Bernie Sanders. But I don't know that a lot of folks really consider Vermont. We're not considered a swing state. We're not, I don't know that we're big in the minds of the national landscape when it comes to the general election. So that's why your topic intrigued me, Emily. And so I'm curious for you, when you suggested it, what were you kind of sitting with?
Well, unfortunately, I don't have a lot of words to add to what you just said, Olga, but I'll give it a try. We're not a swing state. And so I feel very aware that like all around me, I have all these people who are incredibly excited about what happened at the DNC, filled with hope about Kamala Harris running. Like that all feels so good and like spicy and hopeful. And then I also have a lot of people who don't feel like their vote particularly matters here, right? Those same people, those exact same people. And so the question is like, okay, so what then? What now? What do we do with all of this like spicy thrill and like brat memes and like coconuts falling on our head and like whatever else? Like, what do we do beyond like being thrilled with some Instagram posts about the future of the country, given that we're sitting here, right? And then like, does this mean anything for a state party that has, limited reach in a lot of ways? It's really sort of like carried by its local candidates. Living here in Brattleboro, I feel very aware that we have not had a presidential candidate visit Vermont in a very, very long time, but like they always come to Keene. And
Yeah.
so, like, so many of my folks down here, right? Like, we'll just go over to Keene to see people. Um, I have friends who are like going to drive to Pennsylvania. There are regular canvases going into New Hampshire, but just like, I don't know, how do we fit into all of it? Like, saw the weird little crew of delighted people that we sent to the convention from Vermont. I think most people don't even know how people wind up going to the convention. Those were some of the thoughts that I was thinking when I suggested this. And I know that Kevin's been paying a lot of attention to it, and he was wanting a chance to get on and talk to us, and seemed like a perfect moment of synergy.
Hmm. Your
Well,
turn, Kevin.
I think it's important to remember that I always start with history. People people who don't pay a lot of attention to this think that the framers put the political parties and the conventions in the Constitution, which is not true. Political parties are just kind of social clubs. They're nonprofit social clubs. And as chair of the Ways and Means Committee, I still I can't believe I'm on the same show as the chair of the Ways and Means Committee. I'm a little intimidated, but shouldn't we be taxing these political parties and fraternities and all these people? But that's a tough subject for another
Do you think we
show.
should tax churches too, Kevin?
Yeah, churches,
Yeah,
hospitals. Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah. Yeah, if you want to carry that as a lobbyist, feel free.
Okay. All right.
Run with that one.
But so those political conventions are just clubs. And I listened to a great show the other day about the history of this. And back in the 1800s, before radio, TV, internet and cell phones, that's the way people did stuff. They got on their horse and carriage, and they went to Chicago. And Abraham Lincoln was sort of sending his people, and there were 5 others sending their people, and everybody, the smoke-filled room, and they came out 10 days later and had sort of figured it out and settled on a candidate and a platform. It's all made for TV today, and it's basically a party. But it's important to remember that. I think where Vermont fits in is, you're right, not a swing state, no power, your vote doesn't matter. But this political nihilism and it exists in my family as well, about my vote doesn't matter. And even the sort of, and you have this down in the lovely hamlets of West Brattleboro, et cetera, is, I'm going to, oh, Bobby Kennedy. And, even though I'm a Democrat, the sort of democratic machine has made the government so unwieldy and so corrupt and so this and that. I'm going to go vote for Bobby Kennedy and Donald Trump. And I don't know. I think Vermont's role is to do what we do really well, which is to have honest, fair elections and vigorous debates and do democracy really well. Not to mention Bernie Sanders, who does what he does, which is bang on the pharmaceutical companies and doing his shtick. And Peter Welch, and Becca Ballant, who do their jobs really well and take it seriously and be legislators the way legislators were supposed to be. I don't think we can be New Hampshire. Uh, so I kind of think we do what we do, and we just do it as well as we possibly can.
And so does that mean that we're like sort of off the hook for like any presidential race? Like, if we don't want Trump to be elected, like what does anyone in Vermont do about that problem?
I think you tend your own garden and do that as best you can. And then you got to do what so many of our friends are doing. You go to another state, you sign up with Lean Left and you write postcards, or you talk to your friends and neighbors in other states. I remember in '08, that's the first Obama year, I said to myself, oh, screw it. I'm going out to Denver and taking my Republican friend to the stadium in Denver where Obama accepted the nomination. And oh, what a pain in the neck. God, flights. I stayed in his basement. It was terrible. But in the end, he changed and voted for Obama. He's a Democrat to this day. And I look back fondly on that. Was it worth it? Oh, probably not if you put it in a spreadsheet, but psychically and emotionally. I still think it was worth it. So you do what you can. And Vermont is meaningless. This race is going to come down. This race is going to come down not just at those swing states. It's going to come down to about 8 swing counties, like Wayne County in Michigan and Maricopa County in wherever that is, Arizona or Nevada. And that's the Electoral College, which Heather Cox Richardson has taught me was an element of. It was a deal made with the slaveholders at the Constitutional Convention so they could retain their power, and we still have it.
You know, I will say I pity the people who live in those few counties, you know, even in like my tiny non-polled district and my tiny primary race, you know, where less than 1,000 people voted, I still like, we over communicated with voters. Like it was annoying. They were annoyed. And I just like can't imagine like what it is like to be like assaulted by the entire force of like the electoral system in across the country, like in that tiny county, just like you would never answer the phone or the door at some point, right? Okay, so that makes sense to me, sure. But then like there was the incredible party that was the DNC. That was like, you know, a few days of festivities, incredible speeches. Everyone was talking about it. How does that all impact our lives here? Like I have some ideas, but I'm curious to hear like, or if you have another angle on that question or ideas for yourself, Olga, about like how even coverage of that impacts us.
What I will say before I get into that, because yeah, I do have some thoughts on the DNC. About Vermont, what's interesting to me, and I probably heard when I was living overseas, I probably heard more people talk about Vermont because once they knew I was from Vermont, you know, it's kind of like self-fulfilling prophecy. But so I was living in London when Obama was elected. And I think at the time, Vermont was one of the first states to for the AP to call for Obama. And like people were texting me this, like people were paying attention that, oh my gosh, Vermont was one of the first states. And when I would tell friends I was from Vermont, they'd say, oh, you're not the crazy ones. You're like the Bernie Sanders. You're not crazy like the rest of the country. And in fact, many thought Vermont was in Canada because and then they'd say, but you're not crazy Americans. You must be in Canada, which was probably insulting to Canada, but I took it as a compliment at the time. But so I guess what I'm trying to say is we probably shouldn't devalue our space completely. Like even if we're not that swing state, people are paying attention. And what you do does matter on some level.
It's a great point.
I think it's really interesting to think that like of the world, you know, the world's eyes are on America and a lot of folks are very scared by what they're seeing. And to think that maybe Vermont is sort of part of whatever like sliver of trust in America might remain. I'd never really thought about it that way.
Yeah, well, when we were coming out of the Bush into the Obama administrations. Yeah, sorry, Kevin, I cut you off.
No, that's right. And I think it goes back to like, we just have to keep doing what we do and do it well. We've always done it, whether it was, you know, I'm a Cunin, Dean, Douglas, Snelling era person. And I remember Bob Gannett in Brattleboro. And when the Republicans ran this state, and now it's completely changed. But you know, I mean, we got our problems, we got a lot of flaws, we got a lot of imperfections, but I think we do the democracy pretty darn well. And I think we should just keep doing it. You're right. You know, we all have this experience when you're outside Vermont and you tell someone you're from Vermont, and there's this thing that comes over, this like delight that comes over their eyes and says, God, I wish I could live there. And that's the Bernie thing, and it's whatever.
Ben and Jerry's and
it's all the stuff.
Hallmark.
Yeah, it's all the stuff. But there's something to that,
Mhm.
Yeah. I mean, this is slightly off the DNC topic, but I
Mm.
was driving my daughter to college this last weekend and had to stop to charge my car in Waterbury. And the charging station is in the Ben and Jerry's factory parking lot.
I know it well.
Yeah.
Fun.
So I'm just like sitting there in my car. I'm not gonna like, I don't know, I like just had lunch. I'm not gonna go to, but whatever. I wasn't in the mood for ice cream. So I'm just like sitting there looking at my phone, whatever, in the parking lot as the person does. And the person who pulled up next to me, there's like this really incredible congeniality amongst like at charging stations with owners of electric cars. And because we're all just like stuck sitting there for an incredibly long time. And he's like, is this really like the Ben and Jerry's factory? And I was like, yeah. And he's like of Ben and Jerry's? And I was like, yeah. And he's like, so like I'm like, yes, there's ice cream in there. And he's like, lot. And I was like, you could go in and you'll get free ice cream. And like, this was like super white collar, like young New York yuppie kid, and he's like, his eyes just got like wider and wider at like the wonder and mystique of this parking lot. It was absolutely amazing.
It's so nice to hear you say something positive about the line at the charging station, because my experience with my Chevy Bolt is I pull into the one at the Bethel Green Mountain Power fast charger, and there's 3 cars loads from Quebec who are charging to get home. And it's almost like the gas lines of the 1970s where fights were breaking out.
Oh no.
Because you got 2% left on your battery and you've got to get home and you're ready to fight the person who's taking the charging station away from you. Anyway.
I have never had that experience.
Oh God.
It's
Yeah,
always
this needs
like,
a cartoon. This seems like a cartoon strip.
it's always like me and some other woman, and she's like sitting on the curb eating a salad, and she's like, sorry, I'll be 20 more minutes. And I'm like, that's cool. I'll just chill. And then we like talk for a few minutes. And
That might be a gender thing.
I don't know.
When women run the world, it's going to be nicer.
There will be more communication.
Yeah.
Getting back to the DNC, and I love these stories of the charging station because I still have a 2010 Camry, which is, gas still.
You could replace your ride, Olga.
What's that?
Replace your ride program. It's magical. You could get a Chevy Bolt too.
Oh,
we can talk about it after the show.
We should, because I'm a little worried living out in Whitingham having an all electric.
Yeah, no, it's a whole thing.
I don't know.
Yeah, no, yeah.
How's Amanda Brigham in Whitingham? I want to have her on my show. From the old lawsuit over education finance.
Oh
Does
my
she
gosh.
still live there?
I don't know if she still lives there.
I mean, I imagine she's all grown up and has moved on with her life. I don't know.
I'll have to ask the town clerk when I go get my dump sticker.
Right.
Going back to the DNC, I did watch the first night of the DNC, and I have to admit, after all the stuff we've been going through these past few years, she says nicely, because we're not allowed to swear on the radio. Right. It was nice to hear people talk about hope, and it was nice to hear people to say, yeah, we got work to do, but we like being Americans. We like being in America. It's like, oh, this is new and different and refreshing. Thoughts? I don't know. Is that what you picked up on, or?
Madam Chair?
So I did not watch it in like real time. I have lots of folks who did. I watched like highlights the next day, mostly because I've really been enjoying going to sleep at like 8:30 since the primary.
Well done.
Thank you. But I was hesitant. This feels very vulnerable, what I'm about to say, so bear with me. I was really hesitant to watch and like feel anything. And the first thing I watched was, I think, an AOC speech, and I cried like a baby. And afterwards, in like thinking about it, I think I'd been scared to feel hope.
Mm-hmm.
And was sort of like avoiding like diving in, and like, the whole purpose of these things are to elicit feelings, right? Like, it's not for policy or policy discussion or policy negotiations or even like policy discernment and just like display. It's for feels, right? And I was scared to let them access my feelings and like to be like, I don't want to ride the high and like have it all come crashing back down again. And once I gave in, it felt good.
Yeah, I cried like a baby during many of the speeches, and I'll say I wasn't able to stay up for the following nights, but the first night I purposely wanted to see it from beginning to end rather than watching highlights, which is usually how I get my broadcast news because I'm one of those cable cutters, and I happened to be someplace where I could actually see it live on whatever broadcast station it was being broadcast on, and I didn't want anyone else to tell me about it later. I wanted to see it for myself firsthand. For some reason, that felt really important. I think because we get so much of our news filtered through pundits now, of course, here's three pundits right now talking,
I'm not saying
that I really just wanted to see it whole cloth firsthand just for myself.
Mhm.
I have 2 points. One, I watched both conventions start to finish, the whole thing, on Peacock because I'm a cord cutter too, and because I'm of a generation that I want to experience it.
Yes.
And I loved the turning of the page from the old to the new. Bill and
Mm.
Hillary Clinton. Okay, great, done. You're done. And then even the Obamas.
Yeah.
It was great while it lasted. Thank you very much. Now you're done. And then this woman takes the stage, and I had the same feeling I had when Obama arrived. And I thought, and at first, all I was thinking, oh, she's gonna bomb. It's gonna be terrible. And same thing Emily said, like, I don't want to hope that, uh, because we all want everybody to be Obama, or we want everybody to be whatever,
Mhm.
AOC, which is, I think she is a supernova, superstar, once in a lifetime athlete. And I've got my problems with Obama policy wise, but kind of same as Obama. And I said to myself, oh, she can't be that good. And then halfway through, I leaned over to my wife who's crying, and I said, you know what? That's a president. She went in one speech for me, she went from US Senator to VP to, okay, she can go to the NATO conference. She can run this thing. I'm I'm all in. And it happened in about 60 seconds for me. She sort of
Mm.
inhabited the persona, or
Yeah.
the position.
Hmm. Oh, interesting. So it sounds like you were a little on the fence ahead of time.
Well, not in terms of like who you're going to vote for, but
Mhm.
in terms of, like, if you watch her interview with Lester Holt from NBC, and he asks her, "Have you been to the border?" and she sort of freezes up, and
Yeah.
and this is, I'm going to watch the Dana Bash CNN interview tonight for this reason, just to see, God, please, leap this fence. Um, and don't freeze up like you did with Lester Holt. And if she keeps clearing these bars, I get more excited all the time. So yeah, I'm like Emily. I was like, I keep waiting to say, well, it was a good try, screwed again. Um, but 70 million people are going to vote for this guy because they want a tax cut, or they want to destroy the government, or they want to burn it all down because they don't believe it works.
Hmm.
And I think it works pretty well.
I also I want a husband like Doug Emhoff. What a nice man. They're so
Jesus.
cute.
Oh,
Like that. I mean, like, I don't want to. There's sort of like this incredible theme of like female power and like the diversity of the country and like what the immigrant story can be and is, and like a nuanced policy view that's still inspiring, the like taking back of like what freedom means, like all of that, that's so exciting. And like I can't get enough of like the hot takes on how we're redefining masculinity. I think that might
agree.
be like, in terms of sort of like the lasting narrative that comes from this moment, that's my real hope for it. Like, I think freedom will be constantly redefined, and probably like this redefinition will like not last. I can be hopeful about it, but like that doesn't, but like this moment and the possibility of redefining masculinity at a moment when like it feels like everyone across the country is yearning for that, that feels so powerful to me. And so I don't know if like I'm jumping the gun, jumping into that, but that feels everything for me. And like, you know, the relationship, going back to sort of what Vermont is in all of this, the relationship between Vermont and Minnesota,
Yeah.
and like the redefinition of rurality and the possibility for rurality, and the fact that Vermont and Minnesota are two places where like what it means to be rural is it means to care about your neighbors, and to care about your children, and like how much this candidate for vice president like has really embodied that both in his politic and in his life. That feels thrilling to me as much as like the incredible progressive tax policy that was passed as while he was governor. Like, right. That's like also great.
Oh,
Yeah.
got so much there. Can I ask you a question, Emily?
Yeah.
As a goy who was
Mm-hmm.
told by his girlfriend just after college that we could never marry because she was of a different religion than me, which was a total shock to this suburban, white kid. Um, I love Doug Emhoff as just the nice Jewish boy. He,
Mm-hmm.
he- with no, he didn't need to get one over on anybody. He
Mm-hmm.
didn't need to. You want me to carry your bag, Kamala? I'm carrying your bag. You're first off the plane. I mean, it was and Walls is kind of the same.
Yes. It's that
Yeah,
like, so coming up as a kid and like the stereotype, like my grandfather, like, you know, who like fought in World War II, washed the dishes. So like both grandfathers, both of my
yeah.
parents' fathers washed the dishes every night. My father washed the dishes every night. I became an adult and like had no idea that women washed the dishes. Like, because I come from this very Jewish community too, right?
Right.
And so like, and then like when I started realizing that, like realizing that sort of like popular understandings of, you know, American Jewish masculinity were about weakness, right? And that what I saw on the stage, you know, and Bernie embodies this to some degree as well, is that like, you know, Wall's not a Jew, but like a caring, loving, soft father who cares about justice and his neighbors, right? Like Emhoff, just like a good, like just like good men, right? And how there's like this moment, right, where they're saying like, I'm caring, I'm loving, I'm happy for these other people to be powerful next to me. And I am still retaining my sense of self. Like it didn't feel like weakness this time around.
No, it feels very
And there was no
confident, actually.
embarrassment about it, no shame. Yeah, it was like that feels so different to me, even as someone who sort of grew up with men who were expected to carry the handbag
And
as
how
women.
about and Trump and I mean, it fits like a puzzle piece because Trump and JD Vance embody the old toxic masculinity, and JD
Mhm,
Vance is really trying hard to kind of navigate that new world versus because
mhm,
he's married to an immigrant or
mhm.
the child of immigrants who must be saying to him at night, are you sure about this?
You know, I want to believe, like I spent some time wanting to believe that like she was actually a very good person and at night was arguing with her husband, but like we don't actually have any evidence of that at all. So I'm
No.
going to stop imagining that she's a better person than she is.
Yeah.
And because I don't know why I want to, maybe just like because she's a woman who went to law school. I really have no idea.
Right.
And then like, why do I even have that story about her? But
I
I
did
think,
too. I was hoping.
yeah, I think the thing like with these men and what's possible and how it fits with sort of the toxic masculinity is, you know, Amy Schollenberger, who's a lobbyist at the State House and like one of my just like heroes. Um, talks a lot about like the need for the positive story, like, reacting is losing, right? And I think what's different about this vision of masculinity is it's so much more powerful than saying like, I'm with her, I'm for women, I'm against men. It's saying like, no, look, here's another way to be where we can thrive. So it's not even like commenting on the BS that is like Vance and Trump. It's just being like, look at us where we're like healthy and loving and caring for each other.
Yes.
That's why I think it's powerful.
I'll say one quick thing, and then we do have to hear from some underwriters. What's amazing about what you just said too is if you keep telling the positive story, eventually the other one's going to wither because there's nothing to feed it. And yes, so I agree with Amy on the need for the positive story. So hang tight, folks. Emily, Kevin, and I will be back in a moment here on the Montpelier Happy Hour here on WVEW 107.7 LP Brattleboro, your community radio station. So hang tight. Welcome back to the second half of the Montpelier Happy Hour here on WVEW 107.7 LP Brattleboro, your community radio station. If you're just joining us, I'm Olga Peters, the host and producer, and I'm speaking with regular contributor and representative Emily Kornheiser from Brattleboro, as well as Kevin Ellis, who, if you're not familiar with him, you need to go check out the podcast Conflict of Interest. Kevin is a communication specialist and a former journalist, and has been working in the political sphere for eons.
Eons, yeah, eons.
He doesn't seem quite that old, but it does sound like eons.
So before we dive back into the conversation, of course, I want to thank Brattleboro Community Television for taking the video version of the show, sharing it with PEG stations around the state. And Emily, what do we remind listeners of?
Well, Olga, the views and opinions expressed here on the Montpelier Happy Hour are those of the hosts and the guests, respectively, and not the station or platform, jobs, employers, friends, relatives, pets, neighbors, just the people saying the stuff.
Yep. So you have a problem with the stuff, you call one of us. Don't bother calling anyone else.
Ideally, Olga. Ideally, you call
Yeah.
Ideally, Olga.
The Montpelier Happy Hour at gmail.com. There you go, folks. During the break, Kevin, you were talking about some of the conversations you have with guests. And I really thought it was powerful because I'll just go back to rural communities quickly. One thing I am appreciating about the redefining of rural is, so often rural is portrayed as the backwards, the racist, the stupid, you're married to your sibling, you have two teeth, and you can't spell communities, where for us it's a very different experience. And I get frustrated with the very negative portrayal at times. But you said something interesting, Kevin. You talk about asking people, what if nobody cares? Or what if we no longer stop during the snowstorm to help someone out of the ditch? Share more of that. Share more of what you're thinking about.
Well, I just think that I don't want to be dark here because I am an incredibly optimistic guy, but
feel free.
Trump's broken every rule. He just yesterday, we're talking now on a Thursday, he yesterday posted incredibly graphic and explicit sexual words about Kamala Harris that go way beyond anything he's sort of ever said. And he's not going to pay a price for that. And now he may pay a price with upper educated suburban moms, the way we slice and dice the electorate. But he doesn't, back in my day when I was covering Gary Hart, Mike Dukakis, Al Gore, and others, Joe Biden was kicked out of the race in 1987 for plagiarizing one paragraph of a speech, and he was out in 24 hours. And today, we just bake this stuff in with Trump and we just accept it. And I guess my question is, and I ask myself this, do we still care about helping our neighbor the way Emily was talking about? Or has the internet and Fox News and cable TV so divided us into these bubbles that, we don't want to go to the food co-op in Brattleboro or the Works or the Brattleboro Museum or the theater or the whatever, the senior center, because it's too much trouble and I'll just stay home and look at my computer. And I think that's the battle we're fighting. Because if we get off the couch, the good guys win. If you stay on the couch, I think the bad guys win.
I'd love to spend some other episode talking about loneliness in greater depth, but
Yes.
I'll tell you, like, I just went to the senior center for lunch and it was full. And I mean, granted, there are a lot of seniors around here, so I don't know like what slice of the senior population that constitutes. And, people are very worried about downtown Brattleboro right now. And I'm having lots of conversations about that. But like the other day, I was on my way to the Brattleboro Food Co-op to pick something up. And all of a sudden, the streets were like full of people in fancy outfits getting out of the opera at the Latches, right? And it's just, and my neighbor hurt himself and he, does manual labor and so like hasn't been able to work. And like the way I've seen the rest of the neighborhood show up. And like, there was a woman sleeping on the street on Main Street in Brattleboro the other day. And I, along with like, a bunch of us were sort of pausing to be like, is she breathing or is she like, and like everyone was sort of checking with each other about like, what does it mean to help this person, right? So I don't know. I mean, I know here we care, and I know in Minnesota they care. And I have to assume that like, and I know in New York City they care.
Yeah.
So I have to think if it's true in those three places, it's true other places that I haven't known as intimately. I don't know. I think it's like, yeah.
I think it's in us. I think it's in us and we'll do it. And the forces of market capitalism are trying to slice and dice us and force us away from it. And we just got to keep battling. Just one historical note, your point about the Latches. The Latches was saved in 1980, I can't remember, by Paul Brune at the Preservation Trust of Vermont and a bunch of others who said, we're not going to let this thing die. And imagine if we allow ourselves to not give a damn anymore and you lose the Latches, I don't know. I'm not sure what would be there, but there's stuff going on there that matters.
Yeah.
I had a similar conversation for a different article for Vermont Business Magazine. I was interviewing folks behind Jenna's Promise, which I think I've mentioned before. And I think I mentioned this on the last show because so much of this conversation keeps coming up for me. And like, I keep kind of mulling over some of this conversation. But to that note of caring and showing up and getting off the couch is, we were talking specifically about the diseases of despair, loneliness, suicide, substance misuse, alcoholism, and isolation, and how that can creep into a community itself. And Daniel Franklin made the point that you start seeing it when stores close downtown.
Yeah.
And businesses move out. You start seeing it on the actual Main Street level of a community when it's in despair. And it's just given me a whole different way of even looking at that concept of despair and what we do or we don't do when we're feeling it or seeing it. And it's gotten me feeling much more like, okay, this is something that we need to stop in its tracks. This concept of despair.
Yeah. I grew up in New York in the 80s, which like the city at that point was like sort of famous for all of that. And has turned around. And I remember right after college, I was driving to Chicago and I went through Gary, Indiana. And I had studied Gary, Indiana, like very in depth in college because it's an example of like a 1920s industrial progressive era boomtown. And so I'd like done this really deep dive on Gary, Indiana, sort of coincidentally, and drove through it in the 90s. And there was nothing open except plasma donation clinics and fast food restaurants, like to the degree I had never seen anywhere before, and I've actually never seen since. And Gary, Indiana is actually now like a booming suburb of Chicago. And that wasn't that long ago. And so like even when we're scared for the whole country, which is too big a bite to like deal with, and we're too like, and we're pinning all of our hopes on this one woman who gave a very good speech and has some great memes, and I think will be a good leader. We like need to remember that just because the hope like fizzles doesn't mean that like we can't, there is no like, we never go past the point of being able to come back from something. And speaking of that, I want to shift gears very slightly and ask you, Kevin, like we're talking about this, like, before the break, we talked about like new visions of masculinity and like what it would mean for the country to get comfortable with that. And like, you talk about yourself very explicitly as an old white guy, and you were like in this stuff. You were like in the hyper masculinity of like the movers and shakers in politics. And I've seen you be just like unbelievably psyched about a vision of like at least a Montpelier legislature that's really run by women. And so like what does it feel like for you to be part of all of that?
It feels great to not be part of the white male power structure in which I've actively stopped participating in as best I can, and focus on Emerge Vermont and turning the page to the next generation, which Democrats did at this convention. There's a scene in Madeline Cunan's first book in which, when she was chair of House Appropriations, they were getting ready to do the conference committee on the budget, and the Senate chair, I think, was Bob Bloomer from Rutland, and the lieutenant governor was
Is that John's father?
John's uncle.
Uncle. Okay.
And I think the lieutenant governor was Peter Smith, but I may have that wrong. And they cut the budget deal behind closed doors without inviting Cunin to the meeting. And she writes beautifully about this, and she discovers this, and she bursts out into tears, and she was just so angry. And it's just a joy to see that gone. That's over. That in the Vermont legislature, the decisions are made by women, and it's a better place. It's not perfect, but I don't know. It's so much better than it was 20 years ago. It's not that it was truly bad, but it's just diversity. It's true. The trope is true. Diversity leads to better decision making. Just does. And I don't know. It's nice to see that old structure wither and die. I don't know. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. Yeah.
Because it wasn't much fun. I got to say, women are a hell of a lot more fun. They just are. And, I had another point off of that, which is, here's a hopeful point. And I'll test it on you and see if you agree. The 50% of the Trump voters know who he really is and don't believe in him as a human being. They know what he's selling is a lie, that it's a grift, that it's a branding thing, that it's just fake. They know what we know. When it comes to Harris and Walz, we're all sort of saying, yeah, they're the real deal. That's real. We can believe in them. They're telling me the truth. I mean, she's a politician at a very high level, and that's, you're going to be disappointed at times by the political realities. But I think in the end, that's the difference in the election. And that's what you got to fight for, is believing in something that is good versus not believing in something that's really bad, but voting for it anyway.
Hmm. Hmm.
They don't buy it. They know he's a bad guy, but they want the ride, whether it's JD
Hmm.
Vance's wife or whether it's Peter Navarro and all those other criminals. They just want the ride, the power ride, because it's
Mhm.
cool.
Well, and it's very adrenaline fueled.
Yeah.
And so it's exciting in the moment, even if it's kind of a little bit like empty calories, where you go through that bag of cookies or you go through that bag of chips and it's really yummy at the time, but then you have a stomach ache later.
And they think that Emily Kornheiser's view of the world is taking their stuff away.
Mhm.
No.
And what I said in my weekly Substack post was AOC, after AOC's speech, I said, AOC and the rest of them, the woman from Texas, the
Mhm.
congresswoman from Texas, I said, they are coming for you, and they're gonna get theirs because you've taken it from them for a long, long time. And AOC's a superstar and she's coming for you and she's going to take her share.
I think she's coming for you and she's going to improve your life.
Yeah,
Totally.
ultimately.
That's the,
Yeah.
and I also understand, like, so I think that's really hard to believe. Like, I think that's the hardest thing to believe about all this theory of change. And like, I have a lot of questions about like how neoliberal Kamala is or isn't when it comes down to it. And I think how
Sure.
neoliberal she is when it comes down to it actually depends on who she surrounds herself with and not anything intrinsic to her, right? And so that's where my hope is. It's like who people in power surround themselves with.
Mhm.
But um, as I talk to people about in Vermont, it could be the Affordable Heat Act, or nationally, it could be Medicare for all, right? What it means for someone to think like government's going to intervene, and in government intervening, my life is somehow going to improve, I think is actually fairly impossible to believe if you've never seen it. Um,
Yeah.
and so
Yeah.
like, if yeah. And like I can give piles of examples of what that looks like. I think poor white folks have been, certainly experienced a lot of challenges with criminalization, and the war on drugs, and we talk about that in the context of race, but it's very much also in the context of class. And
Mhm.
Bernie doesn't talk about this as much as he used to, but like a lot of it's a class war, and some people are in the class war have chosen that Trump is the person because the rate of their rage about the class war, and some people haven't. And I don't know what to do about that.
Well, you can blame Bill Clinton for a lot, and one of it is
Happy to.
shipping all those jobs overseas with the
Yeah.
NAFTA agreement. And I have a favorite saying, which is Bernie was right. He was right about
Mhm.
NAFTA. He was right about
Mhm.
these trade deals. And I kind of back in the day, I was kind of like, yeah, but Bill Clinton's a good Democrat and I got to support this trade deal. And Bernie's kind of crazy. And boy, I'll tell you, 20 years later, I'm saying, oh my God, he was right. I was wrong. Um, and we have to start producing manufacturing jobs in this country again. And I don't know. We're coming to grips with the post World War II system that we built
Mhm.
to the advantage of an entire class of white men who have all the money.
Mhm.
And now we've really set up the system so they have all the money. Like the rich people have all
So
the
much
money,
money.
Yeah.
and we're going to have to dismantle that.
Mhm. And
I,
so did,
oh, go ahead, Emily.
nope, you go
No,
ahead. Nope, you go
no.
ahead. Nope. Okay. So did you see I feel like as the show's gone on, my like skin has become closer and closer to your shirt and hair color, Olga. Um,
It's just the reflection from your computer monitor. That's all.
It's so funny to see Emily Kornheiser laughing because when she's in the state house, she is so focused and
so
so
focused.
policy serious,
Mhm.
and it's a totally different Emily Kornheiser.
Yeah. Emily has a charming sense of humor. On good
Charming.
days.
He
Charming
does.
sense of
Charming.
humor. I think totally lost my train of thought at this point. But I'm curious, like in terms of this conversation about class and what's possible and like remaking things post Clinton, like did we actually see evidence in all of the flowery DNC speeches that we're going to see real change there?
Well, we saw some change, I would say, under Biden in the sense with some of his like consumer protection laws, and some of those laws. Now, whether people will carry some of that work forward, I don't know.
You know, I agree. Joe Biden went from, and the history books will say this, went from a neoliberal protector of the credit card companies and the banks in Delaware to a guy who believed in antitrust and hired Lena Khan to run the FTC. I mean,
She's so cool.
yeah, she's the savior. She is the
Yes.
savior. And he moved, and it's evidence. The Biden story is evidence that people can grow and evolve. And so, yes, I think the answer is yes. We saw evidence that, with the caveat that Emily has, which is, where's Kamala Harris going to go on antitrust and corporate power and wealth inequality and taxes? We're going to be disappointed several times, but the 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 generational change can only bring more uh, more of the good stuff. And I think the evidence is going to be, if she surrounds herself too much with old Obama people who are invested in that Obama little bit of laissez-fairness, or more activist antitrust type, trust buster types, I think that's a sign to look for. But I think it's there. I think we saw it.
Mm-hmm. One thing I want us all to remember, though, is it's really important who's president.
Yep, sure
And
is.
it's important who we have leading the country. At the same time, I think it's wrong of us to put everything on the president's shoulder, because democracy, we are all expected to participate. And so it matters what's happening at the town level. It matters what's happening at the state level. It matters who we elect for Congress. And so I just want to remind us all, because I think sometimes in our minds we set the president up as the end all be all, and that it's more than that. And so I guess it brings me back to the start of our conversation of how are we still going to show up,
Mm-hmm.
and what's our role within this bigger picture beyond the speeches and executive powers and that type of thing.
I mean, and if we go ahead.
Go ahead. Oh, I was bemoaning. I was interviewing Howard Dean, and I was bemoaning. I was all negative and cynical, and God, and he said, at some point, voters have to step up here, Olga, to what you were saying, Olga. Like, we've got a responsibility here, and if you're sitting on the couch, you can't blame Mark Zuckerberg and Elon Musk for all of this, even though I like to do that. You gotta get off the couch and do something, as Michelle Obama said.
Yeah, and I think my computer's trying to update software. I think what happens there is we love these heroes, right? And because they allow us to also have villains. And Biden's policy agenda going in to the beginning of this, was not possible because of who is in Congress, right? And if we're worried about who the next president surrounds themselves with, like a stronger Congress, a further left Congress, an antitrust Congress, will also push the president's agenda, right? And so it is like there is actually a balance of powers that needs, and we need to be paying attention to every piece of that. But simultaneously, like, that's really hard to do because our brains are made for stories and narrative, right? Like that's what this podcast at the end of the day is about, is what are these stories that we tell? What are the stories behind these things? And it's too much for our brains, and it's certainly too much for our media environment to attend to like what every Congress person in the whole country is doing.
Yeah.
And what our three people are doing has a teeny tiny impact, an outsized impact, but a teeny tiny impact. And so like it's really hard to like keep track of the story
Yeah.
of Congress. It's very easy to keep track of the story of the presidency.
That's
That's
a very
true.
good point.
But here's a hope number two. Look at and I don't mean to be negative about Peter Welch, who I respect, but the change in our member of Congress from Peter Welch to Becca Balint is educational for me. You know,
Say
Becca
more.
Balint. I think Becca Balint's a once in a generation talent. I think she's a great political athlete. I love to talk about politicians as athletes.
You know, it's so confusing to me.
You're talking to two very non-sports people.
But like, no, let's run with it. Like I will learn. I am ready to learn. I am whatever the sports analogy is for however I'm feeling right now. Go for it, Kevin.
You're going to grab the ball and run with it.
I won't use a football analogy, I promise. I just think Becca Balint is a talent with a life experience that is modern and different than Peter Welch's was when he had that seat. And I think that changes the Congress ever so slightly. It changes the Judiciary Committee that she sits on and the kind of judges she wants to talk to and listen to. And, Vermont's impact, we forget that Beth Robinson, the lawyer who argued the same-sex marriage case, is now on the Court of Appeals in our circuit. And that's a huge thing. That matters. And Becca Balint's going to push different stuff than Peter Welch did because of their life experience. And I think that's moving in the right direction.
We have just a couple minutes before the end of the show. Emily, what do you want to leave listeners with?
There is some universe where I will ever be ready to answer that question in any interview. I don't understand. I've been doing this for like 7 years now, and I still never have an answer to that question. That, like, again, I mean, it feels so trite, but like we all have a part to play, and we can't make like outsized heroes and villains of these people in our lives. We have a responsibility to not give into despair, because like it's just not useful. It's not useful, and we have neighbors who need caring for, right? And we need caring for. So just like figure out how you want to plug into all of it, and maybe that's just having conversations. But I hope people just, feel a responsibility towards the future.
And I would say that agree with that, and repeat what Obama said many years ago. Said this is not a game. These stakes are high. There's nuclear weapons, and serious people. This is for serious people. And at some point, you gotta stop trivializing and gamifying this political thing and treat it with the respect it deserves. These are serious issues. Trump's going to get 2 more. If he gets elected, there's 2 more Supreme Court picks coming up. Thomas is going to retire. And so the stakes, just nuclear weapons in the Supreme Court, just those 2 require me to keep writing and keep talking and, keep causing trouble. Because the stakes are high. It's not a game.
Also, to be quite explicit, if folks want to volunteer to get involved in like New Hampshire and Pennsylvania, they can send me an email and I'll hook them up with volunteer opportunities. And that is ekornheiser@gmail.com, or you can just Google me, Emily Kornheiser. You can go to my website, emilykornheiser.org, and you'll find all my contact information there.
Same with me. Google me, you'll find me. It's easy.
And I want to thank everyone for joining us this week. Emily Kornheiser, regular contributor, Kevin Ellis, thank you so much for joining us today. I will bring it back to, showing up takes work. And so many of us have so much in our lives that showing up feels hard. At the same time, if you show up, you get to choose how you show up and where you plug in, and you get to be more conscious about your community. And so you actually have more power if you show
Mhm.
up than if you just sit on the couch. And so I would just encourage people to show up. And the Montpelier Happy Hour will show up on Friday on WVEW 107.7 LP Brattleboro, your community radio station. We're rebroadcasted on Wednesday mornings. And of course, wherever you find your podcasts, you can also find us. So take care, everyone, and have a good weekend.